Welcome back, family. It is your host, Steph, and this is our last episode of 2025, Season 8 finale. I want to remind anyone who won, there were 3 winners, to make sure that you reach out to me so that I can get your information and send you your promised gift. You can email me or you can reach out via DM on any social media platform we are a part of, and I will get back in touch with you quickly. Now, let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today. Today's case, we're talking about something that seems resolved in court, but it's nowhere near resolved in real life. This is the case of Typhenie Johnson. And the reason this one hits different is because we have a conviction. We most certainly have the person who's responsible serving a life sentence, but we don't have Typhenie. And connected to this is another woman, Taalibah Islam, missing 10 years earlier, tied to the same man and surrounded by the same red flags. Typhenie Johnson was 25 years old, originally from Iowa, and in 2016, she moved to Euless, Texas. Now, I'm familiar with Euless because I stay in North Texas. I'm from Dallas, as you guys know. And if you're thinking Dallas, it's about 25 to 35 miles. But the closer city is actually Fort Worth, which is 10 to 12 miles away from Euless. Now, I know what you're thinking, Steph, it's all DFW, it's the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex. But if you're from the city like I am, you from Dallas or Fort Worth, you know that those are 2 different cities, although we're coupled together. So Fort Worth is where you should look to in terms of placing Euless on the map to a major city. Now, Typhenie was one of 4 siblings. She had a twin brother, Asher, and she was the youngest. Now, some of you guys are saying, Steph, how is she the youngest? She has a twin. Well, if you know anything about twins, they don't play about who comes first. And Asher was born first. And it doesn't matter if he was born minutes first or second, it is the fact that he was the firstborn of the twins. That made her the baby of the family. Her family affectionately nicknamed her Pippi, which I thought was incredibly cute. She was known for being kind, outgoing, always down for fun. Sports, outdoor activities. She was a guy's girl, if you get what I mean. And even enjoyed the activities that were labeled as boy activities. She wasn't worried about fitting into a box. And in 2016, Typhenie and Asher decided they wanted to move from Iowa and set up a new life. So they moved to Euless for new opportunities. And immediately they rented an apartment together. Typhenie got a job at an insurance company, and this season represented what we dub as her soft girl era. She had a new job, a new city, a new apartment, new energy. And so, with that, fueled a desire in her to maybe explore romantic partnerships. Tiffany started dating in 2015, and like most of us, she kissed a few frogs. Actually, the first person she started dating was the frog. She found out that her boyfriend, who she thought she had this great connection with, had a girlfriend. She did what most women would do, which is to confront the girlfriend and let her know that I was dating your boyfriend. I had no idea. And what could seemingly end as a Jerry Springer moment wasn't that at all. The girlfriend was very responsive and decided that they should both break up with the boyfriend, ditch the guy who was trying to play them, and become friends. So it was a kumbaya moment coupled with a side of Oprah. They began a friendship, which honestly, shout out to their emotional maturity. And that friend introduced Typhenie to her brother, Christopher Revel. Christopher and Typhenie, which I'll call him Chris for the duration of this episode, were immediately attracted to one another. Their courtship started, and Typhenie was in the full swing of her 20s. Friends, work, romance, real Sex in the City like. And it's reported that Tiffany started spending a lot of her time at Chris's mother's house because that's where Chris lived. Now, it's unclear if she moved in formally or if she decided to just float between her and Asher's apartment. And the second option seems more viable with the things that I have found about this case. Either way, the relationship became routine, and we all know what happens when the newness wears off. You start seeing the parts you didn't see in the beginning because you were so ready to get to know the person, had butterflies, and everything seemed like sunshine and roses on a bright sunny day. But with familiarity brings contentment, but also can show some of the sides that we don't want to reveal. And one of the things that was a red flag that Tiffany's mother immediately noticed that caused her to be a little off balance about their relationship. And I don't want to call it a red flag so much as it was a yellow flag at first. Her mother made notice of the age difference. Chris was in his 30s, and Tiffany, when they first started dating, she was 24 years old. And so this was a drastic age difference. They were in two different seasons of their life. But she wanted to give the relationship time because initially the relationship seemed to be going well. Tiffany told her mother, Deb, that Chris was controlling. And on Murder in the Black, we say it all the time. Control is not love. I don't care how it's packaged. Now, Deb didn't like what she was hearing. Chris didn't want Tiffany wearing makeup. He didn't want her wearing clothes that showed her figure. He preferred baggy clothes that weren't flattering. Coupled with the age difference and now the control aspect of their relationship, Deb knew that this more than likely was not the relationship she wanted her daughter involved in. But I think as parents, you're constantly trying to straddle this balance with your adult children, where you're trying to give them your advice, but not push them into a relationship that you feel isn't for them in the first place. So it's this balancing act. And her mom wanted to make sure she was available if Tiffany wanted to talk about their relationship. She was trying to navigate that. And throughout this case, you'll see that that's what everybody tried to do as it relates to Tiffany. It was this balancing act of should I just say exactly how I feel? Should I finesse my opinion with some advice? Or should I just outright tell her that this isn't for her? And Deb, like most people in Tiffany's life at this time, was just trying to figure it out. But she started to see that initially Tiffany was complaining about the controlling behavior, but then everyone in Tiffany's life started to notice that she wasn't the person who took pride in how she dressed and presented herself. She was dialing herself down. Now, Tiffany was the type of person, as you guys have probably seen right now via video, Tiffany was a beautiful girl. It didn't matter if she dressed in baggy clothes or if she didn't look her best. She was beautiful. She was going to receive male attention, but her family saw that she was trying to dial it down for her relationship. And when Deb saw this, she asked her about the change. And Tiffany said she didn't want men looking at her. That line is never just a line, it's usually a warning. Now, around May of 2016, Tiffany and Chris kind of swapped where they were spending most of their time. Instead of being at Chris's mom's house, they decided to go to Tiffany and Asher's apartment. And this is when Asher really got a front row seat at the type of relationship his sister was in. According to Asher, he said that the relationship was toxic. There was constant arguments. He described it as volatile, jealous, and controlling. Now, I want to take a brief second to just talk to you guys about the word toxic. Toxic has become something that we use commonly within our conversations that I personally think it has lost its true definition. But what Asher was experiencing, not only was it toxic, but it was better characterized as abuse, emotional abuse and verbal abuse. And I think we have to call a spade so that we can fully address it. But I also want to envelop what I'm saying in grace because when you're in your 20s, you are going based off of your experiences. And what may seem to be toxic could just be characterized as constant arguments and jealousy and controlling. But we tend to minimalize those things that are really blaring red flags, but abuse that will often take shape and shift into different types of abuse. Usually, if somebody's being verbally abusive, it's not a hard for them to then become emotionally and then physically abusive. And so I want to make sure that we bring awareness to the word toxic. Yes, by definition, that was a toxic relationship. But more importantly, it was an abusive one. Now, Tiffany was exhausted. She was trying to work, please her man by dressing herself down, but she was arguing nonstop with him, and the relationship just seemed to be more than what she could bear. Now, she made attempts to leave and to break the relationship off, but to no avail, she stayed. She told her mom there was an instance of physical abuse, and Deb then encouraged her to end the relationship. And it's unclear if Tiffany knew Chris's background at the time, but it's important to note that Chris had a criminal history. He had served time in prison for attempted burglary with intent to commit assault. During the time they were dating, he was on parole. And that just gives us a glimpse into who Chris was. Now, in 2016, Tiffany's aunt Janelle decided to visit her in Asher. And you know how it is with families. You hear rumors of so and so's boyfriend, but you really are trying to meet the person to create a narrative of your own. So she was already skeptical about Chris based on some of the things that she heard, but she wanted to see it for herself up close and personal. And during this visit, Tiffany had car trouble and she called Chris to come and help her. And Chris told her, "Yeah, no, I can't come help you. Get somebody else to do it. I'm playing a video game." And Aunt Janelle heard about this incident and knew that this was not the situation that she wanted her niece to be involved in. After the visit, Tiffany texted her aunt asking how to break up with someone. And her aunt told her to be practical. Matter of fact, the "it's not you, it's me" routine. I need to work on myself. I need time and space to breathe. With that advice, Tiffany initiated the breakup. And Chris was not accepting of it. He moved his belongings back to his mother's home, but he kept showing up at Tiffany and Asher's apartment. By this time, he had built a relationship with Asher that was outside of Tiffany. And so, although they broke up, it seemed natural that he would still show up, at least for Asher, it did. But for Tiffany, it didn't. It seemed like stalking. And he would send her hateful text messages begging for her to hook back up with him. And he really did use his friendship with Asher as the reason he still needed to be there. And Asher soon realized that this was the reason that Chris was coming around, not to hang out and play video games or to watch football. It was really because he wanted to know about Tiffany's whereabouts because his questions when he came over would always be centered around Tiffany. What is Tiffany doing? What does she need help with? Who is she talking to? And Tiffany found it hard to navigate this boundary that she wanted to put in place that usually happens after you break up with somebody. I don't see you. We have time apart. That didn't exist for Tiffany. When she would come home to her sacred space, there he would be also. And that was incredibly difficult to navigate, especially because it seems that at least for a season, Asher really believed that Chris was coming over there to hang out. It was impossible for her to avoid him in some ways. What do you do? Not go home? She had to go home and she would just come away, tuck herself away in her room, trying not to engage in any type of conversation with Chris. October 2016, a month had passed, and Tiffany was ready to move on. Now, she had already broken up with Chris. She was ready to start dating again, and she did. She started dating a man named Russell casually. On October 10th, 2016, she invited Russell to her apartment that she shared with her brother for dinner. Now, Asher's girlfriend, Jasmine, had moved in after the breakup between Tiffany and Chris, and she also worked with Tiffany. After they got off of work, they decided to go home and get prepared for the dinner that Tiffany was having with Russell. Tiffany goes to the back to freshen up and set up, and she's awaiting Russell to arrive. Then, unexpectedly, Chris shows up, happy, excited, holding beer and plastic shots. He thinks he's coming to dinner. Tiffany and Jasmine are startled because not only is he not invited, but Russell is on the way. This is quite a conundrum. And when Asher arrives at home, both Jasmine and Tiffany pull him to the side and ask him if he invited Chris. He says that he didn't invite him, but claimed that Chris had asked him if he could come over to watch the game. And it seems that Asher never responded. So Tiffany decided that she needed to do something fast to avoid having her ex and her boyfriend at the same place. She decides that she's going to go meet Russell at Walmart to avoid him coming there and seeing her ex boyfriend. She haphazardly just has her socks on, grabs her keys, leaves out of the apartment, and heads downstairs. When she gets to her car and starts it up, she doesn't move immediately. And Chris and Asher go out to the balcony and kind of just watch what she's doing. There is an issue. I mentioned before when Aunt Janelle visited, Tiffany was having car trouble then. And it seems like this car trouble persisted. And although she got her car fixed, it seemed like there was still something going on. Her brake fluid was leaking. Now, she texted Asher saying the brakes weren't working, so she wouldn't be able to go. And Asher texted her back and said that he had drove the car earlier and it seemed to be working. But now, as he looked down from the balcony, he saw that there was a puddle of brake fluid. There was no way she was going to be able to meet Russell at the Walmart. Her plan was a no-go. Chris decides that he's going to be a superhero and he goes downstairs to help. Instead, a fight breaks out. And I want you to know that during all of this, Asher is looking down at the scene, just kind of watching it unfold. Now, he doesn't know what's being said, but immediately he notices that it looks like Tiffany and Chris are involved in some type of a fight. And by her body language and some of the things that he's saying, he knows that this is an argument. And he kind of sees Tiffany telling Chris that he needs to go. She doesn't want his help. And the argument just seems to be ongoing. Now, Asher eventually leaves the balcony and goes back inside. And I'm not sure about the time. Was he out there looking at this scene for about 10 to 15 minutes, 10 to 20? Did he leave the balcony and that was 5 minutes? We really don't know the time frame, but we do know that after he saw them arguing for quite some time, he eventually leaves and goes back into the apartment with his girlfriend, Jasmine. But some time in between all of the chaos and Asher going back inside, well, guess who shows up? Russell arrives. Now, this is something that Tiffany was trying to derail the whole entire time. But obviously, it was a situation that was bound to collide. Now, Russell is walking into chaos, and the argument is so intense that Tiffany doesn't even realize Russell is trying to get her attention. Have you ever been in an argument that's so intense that it doesn't matter who comes up to you and talks to you, you gotta finish saying your last word? And if you're Russell, that has got to be one of the worst scenes to walk into. You can practically see steam coming out of Tiffany's ears. Chris has succeeded in disrupting her life at that exact moment that she tried to move forward. And with Russell unable to get her attention, he decides he's going to go inside and talk to Asher because he couldn't speak to Tiffany. Now, Asher and Russell then go out to the balcony to check on the whole scenario, but Chris and Tiffany weren't visible anymore. They could see them to the side because obviously it was open parking, and that's how he was able to see his sister and Chris arguing in the first place. Now, to the side was a garage, and I don't know if it was covered or open, but it was a side area that he couldn't necessarily get clear visibility, but he saw Typhenie and Chris, and they were near the area still actively in their argument. Moments later, Chris returns to the apartment. He grabs his belongings, including the alcohol that he brought, and it appears that he's leaving. He introduces himself to Russell and then turns to Asher and says, "I should have known this all along." Now, what does that mean? Was he implying that Typhenie was cheating on him the entire time? That he knew there would be another guy? We don't know, but we know what that kind of statement sounds like in real life. Asher asks where Typhenie was. Chris claims she left with a mechanic. Now, if you remember, I told you Typhenie kind of haphazardly grabbed her things. Like she grabbed her keys. She didn't have on any shoes. She was simply trying to go and deter Russell from showing up at the apartment. She wasn't equipped to just leave and go without coming back. She didn't even have shoes on. This was odd. Why would Typhenie not tell anyone? Asher, Jasmine, and Russell call Typhenie, but they get no answer. They went outside, but they didn't see Typhenie. The last time anyone saw Typhenie was October 10th, 2016. She was 25 years old, and the last known person to see her was Chris Revel. And here's why the scenario of her leaving with a mechanic didn't make any sense. Because she had plans for dinner. Everything pointed to her being at the apartment that evening. So for her to vanish without a trace was unthinkable. And Asher knew it. Asher and Russell went to Typhenie's car and they saw her keys lying on top of the driver's side. Now, she was going to get her car fixed. Why wouldn't she take her keys, lock up her car? That doesn't make any sense. Then Asher notices Chris's car. His trunk was open, the driver's door was open, and it was parked oddly off to the side. So you have parking spaces, right? And Chris didn't have his car in any of the parking spaces. He had kind of hopped a curb, and his car was in the grass nearby. Now, they couldn't see what Chris was doing, but he was doing something in his trunk, and they really couldn't tell. So they decided that they would go to the other side so they could get more visibility on what Chris was doing. But when they got to the other side, Chris left, speeding out of the parking lot. And I know what some of you are thinking. Why on earth did Asher and Russell not walk up to him and ask him what he was doing? But I want you guys to remember that more than likely, from what I've surmised, is that Chris was a ticking time bomb, especially in his relationship with Typhenie. And Asher had been up close and personal with that type of anger. The first probability is that he was more than likely scared of what Chris could do or what Chris would say. I've said it before that we rationalize things in our mind. We say, they probably aren't doing that. I'm probably jumping to conclusions. We got to give them some grace. This was probably on their mind. After all, this was kind of, midday approaching the evening. And they probably rationalized why they felt like it wasn't a big deal. They just needed to reposition themselves to get a better view. So they decided to go where Chris's car had been parked. And they found Typhenie's cell phone, one of her socks, and a plastic empty shot glass that Chris brought over. And with all of this was something that Asher knew that something sinister happened to his sister and that Chris was responsible. Asher calls Chris from Typhenie's phone and asks him to come back. Now, Chris asked if Asher was accusing him of something and said he'd return within 5 minutes, but he didn't. Asher called again, but Chris eventually answered, claiming that he had been pulled over by the police and quickly hung up. By this time, No one had heard from Tiffany. She didn't come back. And they had all this evidence to suggest that Chris was responsible for her disappearance. So Jasmine, Asher's girlfriend, called 911. Investigators arrived at around 10:58 p.m. They had Asher call Chris. He answered. They told him he was a suspect and he needed to return. So Chris does. But prior to him getting off of the phone with investigators, they asked him, where was Tiffany? He says he had no idea where Tiffany was. She left with an older man who he thought was a mechanic and talked about needing to fix her car. Now, it took him about 40 minutes to return after ending the phone call with investigators. That had been about an hour and a half since he initially left. Chris came back frazzled, and although he was wearing the same clothes, according to Asher, he had a different undershirt on. Now, it's October. It's cool in Texas. So for you to be sweating is unusual. And police knew that this guy was suspicious just based on the story and based on his appearance. But that wasn't enough by itself to arrest him on probable cause. So instead, they decided to look at his story of being pulled over by the police earlier in the day. And when they check, they discover that it was a lie. They arrest him. And during questioning, Chris showed no remorse or concern. As a matter of fact, Chris was more concerned about getting his vehicle back and going to work than he was about the disappearance of Tiffany. He didn't even call her Tiffany. He called her that girl. And what we know about true crime is that when people try to distance themselves from the victim or the crime itself, more than likely this suggests that they have something to do with it. Now, police go on to search Chris's mother's house. In the backyard, they find a black bra with the clasp broken. They find a white t-shirt, a silver bracelet, and a broken smartwatch they believe belonged to Chris. They bring in cadaver dogs, but nothing came up in the search. And they also had the cadaver dogs search the surrounding area near the back of his mother's home, but nothing was found. They asked Chris's mother, why are these items at your house? And she claimed that Tiffany often would leave her clothes at the house as she frequently spent the night. But this didn't answer the question of why it was found in the backyard. And she surmised that maybe one of the dogs got the clothes and brought them out there, but that just didn't make sense. But investigators couldn't find anything that directly explained Tiffany's disappearance connected with the search. So they decide to review footage from neighborhood cameras. Neighborhood footage caught Chris arriving at his mother's house around 10:06 p.m., the night Tiffany went missing. But here's the chilling part. He never went inside. He drove around the area for about 20 minutes, then left. This was also confirmed by his mother, who said she heard him the driveway, but he never came into the house. Weird. So the question becomes, what was Chris doing between leaving the apartment and then arriving in his mother's neighborhood around 10:06 p.m.? Investigators looked into two mechanics who communicated with Tiffany, but both were cleared. There wasn't definitive evidence, but the case was heavy with circumstantial evidence against Chris. Then Chris's past became impossible to ignore. 10 years earlier, he was involved with another woman who disappeared, Taalibah Islam. They met in high school and dated afterward. Many people knew the relationship was abusive. In 2005, authorities were called when Taalibah was pregnant with her and Chris's son. She was 9 months when Chris decided he wanted to punch her in the stomach and in her head. She tried to leave, but as we know, the cycle of abuse is hard to escape. When she had her son, she wanted to keep her family together. She believed that things would change, and they didn't. On January 16, 2006, Taalibah went to Chris's house with their baby, hoping to spend some time. And Chris was annoyed that day. He punched Taalibah in the face again. Now, Chris's sister, the same sister who introduced Tiffany to Chris, was present during this incident. And she claimed that Chris punched Taalibah so hard that she thought that Taalibah's jaw was broken. She claimed she was afraid. We cannot ignore the elephant in the room. Okay? This is the same sister who introduced Typhenie to Chris. And my true crime brain immediately goes, how does that happen? Because here's the messy layer. Typhenie was friends with Chris's sister, who had been dating the same boyfriend Typhenie dated first. She experienced the abuse that her brother carried out on his baby mother firsthand 10 years prior. And this is the guy that you introduced to Typhenie? Now, this just doesn't seem right. And it raises all types of questions. And I want to know what you guys think about that aspect of this case. Now, after this incident occurred, Taalibah calls one of her friends who confirms that she spoke with Taalibah that day. Taalibah was upset and whispering on the phone and asked if her friend could pick her up. But after that call, Taalibah was never seen again. A week later, Taalibah's sister got a phone call from Chris saying that Taalibah dropped the baby off and never came back again. Now, Taalibah's family knew that something was wrong. Taalibah loved her baby, and she would never abandon her son. 16 days later, Chris files a missing person report. She left the house, got in an unknown car, and never returned. The case, with very little tips and no evidence, went cold. When Typhenie disappeared and people connected it to Taalibah, everybody's spidey senses went off. Now, Chris remained in custody from October 10th, 2016. Typhenie's family offered a reward. The police conducted several searches hoping to find Typhenie in between the time that Chris was locked up and before his trial. Typhenie's family offered a reward that reached up to $20,000 for any information leading to Typhenie being brought home. But by the time of the trial, nothing surfaced. Chris was charged with aggravated kidnapping. In August of 2019, 3 years after Typhenie vanished, Chris went to trial. His defense strategy focused on lack of physical evidence, question the case, and attempt to get it thrown out on a Brady violation, arguing there was no DNA matching Typhenie in his trunk. Thankfully, didn't happen. The state portrayed Chris as a jealous ex who couldn't stand to see Typhenie move on. The jury found him guilty of aggravated kidnapping. Typhenie's family and Taalibah's family read victim impact statements at his sentencing. Chris was sentenced to life with parole eligibility in 2046. In 2021, he appealed, arguing the evidence wasn't sufficient and certain witness testimony should not have been allowed. The Second District Court of Appeals reviewed the case in June of 2021 and rejected his arguments, said the circumstantial evidence was sufficient, and ruled the testimony was properly admitted and affirmed the conviction and the life sentence. So yes, the legal system says this conviction stands, but Typhenie and Taalibah are still missing. Takeaway. This is the part of the story where the court says the case is closed. Christopher Revel was convicted. His appeal failed. He's serving a life sentence. On paper, this case has an ending. But for Typhenie Johnson's family, that ending doesn't feel complete because Typhenie has never been found. Typhenie's family is left with accountability, but not answers, justice, but not closure. And when we talk about the connection to Taalibah Islam, it's important to be careful because the law already has been. Christopher Revel has never been charged in Taalibah's disappearance. And that distinction matters. The justice system doesn't operate on instinct or pattern. It operates on what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But families don't live by that legal threshold. They live with memory, with timelines, with echoes. Taalibah disappeared 10 years before Typhenie. after documented abuse, after being last seen with the same man, after leaving behind a child she would have never abandoned. So while prosecutors could only argue what happened on October 10th, 2016, loved ones are left holding two stories that feel painfully intertwined. Not because the courts say they are, but because human experience does. And that's the space families are forced to live in, where one case is resolved, another is not, and the truth may never fully surface. I want to ask you guys a question. What does justice look like when the system can punish someone but can't tell you where your loved one is? There's also another question that lingers here, one we can't ignore. What responsibility do people around abuse carry when they've witnessed it? As we head into the holiday season, this case reminds us that some families aren't just grieving a loss, they're grieving uncertainty. Typhenie Johnson and Taalibah Islam are remembered not just because of how their stories intersect, but because they mattered long before they ever became cases. And until the questions stop, we'll keep telling their stories. Before we close out today, I just want to take a moment to say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Season 8 has been heavy, emotional, thought provoking, and honestly, incredibly meaningful. And that's because you showed up and you've listened and you've been a part of our community. So, as we head into the holiday season, I want to wish every one of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, whether this season feels joyful, complicated, quiet, or heavy. Just know you're a part of this community, and I am grateful for you. Now, here's what to expect over the break. We'll be taking a short pause from brand new weekly episodes, but we are not going anywhere. During the break, we'll be rebroadcasting select episodes from season 8, episodes that deserve another listen, that deserve to be told through video as well, and just so you can have another reflection. And while the main feed is on break, new cases will continue to drop for our paid subscribers. If you're a part of our subscription family, you'll still be getting fresh content because the work doesn't stop here. If you've been thinking about joining, this is a perfect time. Apple Podcasts is offering a free trial, 3 days worth of content for you to enjoy. You can explore the subscription episodes and see if it's for you. And if it is, we most certainly want you to share with us. Mark your calendars, family. Season 9 officially returns on January 8th. We are coming back with new cases, deeper conversations, and stories that still need to be told. Thank you again for rocking with Murder in the Black through season 8. Rest, reflect, hold your people close, and we'll meet right back here in January. Until then, take care. Merry Christmas. I love you all. Bye.